Asbury Park Press, the Middletown Patch, and the Middletown Township Public School District website, and the posting of such notice at the August T. Minor administrative offices and each elementary, middle, and secondary school website in the district. Roll call.
Mrs. Caminiti. Mr. DeFranco.
Here.
Mr. Donlin. Mr. Gymo.
Present.
Mr. Little.
Here.
Mrs. Minuis.
Here.
Mrs. Wright.
Here.
Mrs. Stella.
Here.
Mrs. Rogers.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this time, to open up the microphone for public comment on agenda items only. So that's public comment on only the topics that are on our agenda this evening. We do have a 3-minute limit for each speaker and a 30-minute limit total.
And Mr. Taylor, would these be for the items that the board is taking action on this evening?
Well, if you're saying, Ms. Rogers, are these agenda items only?
Because we have 2 public comments, one for agenda items, one
Correct.
for other things.
Yeah.
So these
I
would be
think
for
the protocol is that
Yes.
this first part is for agenda items only.
that the board's taking action on.
Well, I say agenda item. If it's on the agenda, then that's whether it take action or not is to be determined. Because
Okay.
it could be pulled, tabled, but if it's on the agenda, they can comment on that.
Okay.
Looks like we have one hand raised. 2. We'll start with Susan Heckel. Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I just joined the Zoom meeting. I don't know if I accidentally hit raise hand or anything.
Oh, okay. Not a problem. Alrighty. We will move on to Cynthia Stiesi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my MacBook's been acting up, sorry. A few questions is with what's on the agenda with the whole, I guess there's the ESY program that's actually supposed to start next Wednesday. Plus, on top of that, I guess I don't know if you guys have already made your decision of the whole fall protocol and everything. I mean, I see that a lot of districts are following through with doing an AB program day kind of thing. And I know a lot of districts are basically trying to stick with virtual until we all get a vaccine, which I can understand. We all want to be healthy. And I know Ms. Gavin right there because I know her from North when my daughter went to Lion Cubs. So I'm all for the health. But my well-being is mainly for my daughter. She is a special ed student. She's being transferred to Bayview. And right now, a lot of the issues I hear from a lot of parents is the factor of their emotional state. Because a lot of the kids want to be back with their friends, back to their teachers. It's not good for a child's well-being or their health. Being cooped up onto a computer, pretty much, you might as well, not 24/7, but even 6-7 hours a day. So I would like for y'all to think, how do you guys feel about the factor of your children being on a computer for that long? Because it can cause eye strain too. Even though we all want them to exercise and everything, they're not going to sit, They want to sit, they want to stand, they want to sit. They're not going to be able to sit still for an X amount of time. And a lot of the parents want to send their kids back full time. And I'm ready to send my daughter back. I mean, for ESY, I don't mind doing the virtual because somebody said you guys are only 2 hours a day. But for school, for September, I want to be back. I want her to go back to her normalcy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please stay tuned because we do have a presentation on this later
Miss-
on in the.
If I may, Mrs. Rogers, and I think Ms. Doherty, now I think I understand the premise of your question. And I would submit that if it meets with the board's approval, if the public comments at this time can be limited to the agenda items for which action will be taken, or alternatively stated, any comments about the presentation on the school opening and educational focus be reserved until after the presentation is given, because they may be addressed through their presentation. I hope I stated that the right way, but I'll defer to the board's desire and preference. And thank you, Ms. Doherty. Now I understand where you're coming from.
Thank you.
Sounds good, Lester.
Okay.
Okay, Chris, do we have anybody else who wants to speak on agenda items only that the board is taking action on this evening?
No, all hands have been lowered. No.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the recommendations of the superintendent of schools with Dr. George.
Dr. George, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was still on mute. I'd like to clarify information as it relates to the social distancing rally, Spread Love, Not Hate, held on Sunday, June 28th in the parking lot of Middletown High School North. After walking through the adjacent section of our community, students and alumni representing both high schools requested to hold a peaceful rally to support, in support of social justice. The Middletown Township Public School District believes in the power of students' voice and the impact their positive actions can have on the world. The district worked in coordination with the township and the police department to support our community. I'm grateful to Chief Weber, Township Administrator, Mr. Mercantanti, the Township Committee for their assistance to our school community and our community at large. It was a positive event. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on now to student services, Michelle Tiedemann.
Well, really, I'm sorry, Ms. Rogers, we just really have a motion under student services for approval of the revised ESY dates
Okay,
for this summer. So
All right.
that's why we just need the board to make a motion on that. And
okay. So I need a motion to approve A1, the approval of the revised ESY dates, July 23rd, 2022, August 21st, 2020.
So moved. Second.
Discussion?
Yes,
All
could you just review how summer school is going to work? Is it 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off? 2 weeks in person, 2 weeks virtual?
Yes, so the revised dates moves it one day back so that we're starting on a Thursday rather than a Wednesday. But it is a hybrid program, 2 weeks in school, 2 weeks on virtual, except for those parents who elected for a fully virtual program, then they are doing the full 22 days virtually. But with the 22 days, the way it's set now, the first 2 days will be virtual for everyone, and we'll split the 4 weeks, 2 weeks for cohort A, 2 weeks for cohort B.
Okay. So all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I need an emotion to approve B1, the approval of the contract between the Middletown Township Public School District and Proximity Learning to provide virtual instruction in the high school American Sign Language classes during the 2020 to 2021, including live instruction, class setup, user license, facilitator onboarding, technical support, and client success and support team support at a total cost of $72,618 as per the curriculum attachment.
So moved.
I need a motion to approve, please.
So
Seconded.
moved.
I need a second, please. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? I need a motion to approve finance items C2 through, I'm guessing this is 4, 2, 3, and 4, Amy? Or is it 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, I'm
C1, 2.
sorry, the
Okay.
numbering is off. It should be, I mean, it really should be 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, so I need a motion to approve C1, 2, and 3, please.
So
Just so
moved.
everybody knows, that's all for ESY transportation.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Moving on to personnel, and we have to look at the addendum for this.
We have to look at the addendum, and we also have a couple of other items, as was reviewed with the board, that did not appear on the addendum. So I just want to read those into the public meetings so that those are included in the vote. One is for the appointment of Frances Taylor as our summer ESY nurse at the curriculum rate of $46.39 an hour. And the other one is for the approval of a practicum and executive leadership assignment for Maria Paradiso Tesla and working in the ESY program with Monmouth University.
Okay, in addition to that, I need a motion to approve 1 through 12.
So moved.
I need a second, please.
Seconded.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, moving back to our regular agenda. We are moving on to the presentation of the Middletown Public School District reopening, community survey results, and discussion of health considerations by Rich DiBenedetto, the Township of Middletown Health Department Director.
I think Mr. Rotolo is going to pull up the presentation at this point. And we have several administrators, including Mr. DiBenedetto, who are going to be speaking.
Do you have me? Are we presenting? You can see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen. You just got to go to present mode on the actual slide deck. There you go. I think Mrs. Walker, you were going to,
Right now? Okay, I'm sorry.
Chris, if you can just advance the slide, please.
Yes, just advance to slide 2. All right. Okay, tonight we're going to be providing an update on the work that we're doing to prepare for school in September. And on June 26th, which was not even 3 weeks ago, the NJDOE released their guidance to reopening schools in their road, it's called the Road Back Plan. And this plan provides guidance in key areas, and it outlines something called anticipated minimum standards, which refers to items that we must incorporate into our reopening plan. Then it also has considerations that districts should incorporate into their thinking about reopening, but they don't have to necessarily use those components, only if they work with the plan, only if they make your plan better. It's a very detailed plan. It's well over 100 pages, but it does leave some questions for those who are doing the planning. The 4 key areas included are leadership and planning, policy and funding, conditions for learning, and continuity for learning. And the continuity for learning includes efforts that this summer we're working on to provide that for our students, such as our extended school year program, social emotional learning opportunities for our students this summer, and other learning opportunities. We're also going to review the results of our caregiver survey and our staff survey. The information that we got from these surveys are guiding our planning. And then finally, we'll discuss the next steps and timelines. And as you see, you'll see the slide numbers that we're going to be discussing these items on tonight. You can move to slide 3. The New Jersey Department of Ed has laid out what they know and then what remains to be seen regarding obligations of districts to open for in-person instruction in the fall. What they know is that the current data and the trends, health trends, they support operating in-person instruction in September. And unless there is a change in the data and the trends, they are requiring schools to provide in-person instruction in accordance with the guidelines that they laid out. And the plan identifies the possible need to create a hybrid instructional model, which is combining an in-person model with a virtual learning model in order to operate schools at reduced capacity. We need to be able to also pivot instruction at any time. This could be a result of some trends in the health data, whether it's at state level, county level, local level, district level, even at individual school level. So we have to have the capacity to swivel back to virtual instruction as needed. In slide 5, we're talking about what, the DOE is talking about what we don't know. Obviously, we don't know what the future is going to hold for trends in health and data, and this will impact their guidance, and it will ultimately impact our instructional model depending on what those changes are. Hopefully, we will still keep trending, better and better. They recognize that the districts and schools across the state are different, and that each district must plan what best meets their educational and health needs while aligning with those minimum standards that they have set out. And we also don't know whether we will need to pivot back to virtual instruction, but as they said in the prior slide, we have to be ready for that. In slide 5, the first area identified in their roadmap is about leadership and planning. And prior to the release of the state guidelines, we began to assemble our own committee of stakeholders to develop our district plans. And our committee consists of 8 subcommittees in the key areas of operations and funding and learning. They consist of a variety of stakeholders, including staff, parents. We have contractors such as our YMCA involved. These subcommittees, they reviewed the minimum standards in the roadmap that was presented to us by the NJDOE, and they're working on making recommendations that will be included in the district's plan. The committees, though, are looking at this. They're taking a 30,000-foot perspective in creating recommendations. They're creating a framework for instruction that includes safety, students' social emotional needs, students' instructional needs, and other components of the plan. But it really is that big framework from up above, not all the minute details for each school. That's where the school-based pandemic response teams come in. And each school will have one of these teams consisting of administrators, teachers, and other staff, as well as parents. And this team will manage, plan, make decisions related to implementing that overarching plan that the district committee has created. You go to slide 6. This slide 6 talks about the actual responsibilities of each school's pandemic response team, which plays a key role in implementing the district plan, particularly in terms of the health and safety and crisis management, very important areas for that team. They will also work to provide staff with support and training. They're going to be responsible for reviewing school data related to health and safety and making decisions based on that. They work to foster a safe and positive school climate and provide a communication pathway to and from the school and the community so that they can address concerns of the community as they arise, and then they can ensure accurate and timely information is shared within the school community. In slide 7, the NJDOE guidance also addresses the critical areas of scheduling and staffing. It is clear from the guidance that some form of in-person model must be in place, and the model must be built with student and staff health, and this is both student and staff, and really family health and safety as a priority, as outlined in the minimum standards and also the considerations, but also with input from the school community, the staff, the parents, on the needs of our community and our students. Communication with staff when developing the plan and throughout the year is essential to support their efforts to meet the instructional and social emotional needs of students, as well as to understand and accommodate the staff's unique needs. Providing virtual instruction is also necessary according to the plan. It is recommended that we provide a combination of synchronous instruction, which is instruction that while students are home but online, they are participating in real time with the teacher and possibly even in real time with a class that's in person in school. Also, asynchronous instruction, which is without a live instructor. It's more, it might be a recording of a mini lesson by a teacher, but the teacher isn't live at the time. So it's going to be a combination of synchronous and asynchronous. For the younger students, the synchronous form of virtual learning provides more structure and more immediate support for that student. With synchronous instruction, though, time constraints and schedules with the parents and students have to be a consideration as much as possible, because the idea is to get them on live with the teacher. As students become more independent in their learning in the middle school and the high school, moving to an asynchronous virtual environment provides them with a little more flexibility and choice in terms of time and choice of what they want to study. So, those options, vary depending on age of students. Other considerations for scheduling and staffing include keeping students in small cohorts and minimize the mixing of these groups of students. The fewer person a student is in contact with, the lower chance they have of catching the virus from one of those contacts. So one idea in the roadmap is to minimize mixing of students like in hallways by having the teacher move between groups rather than groups of students move to teachers. This is easier to accomplish at the lower levels than the upper levels, but the guidance will help us, navigate through those challenges. And I think Ms. Doherty is going to speak about funding at this point. We already did that one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are
Keep
we
going.
going the right way?
Keep going. Yep.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So a couple of things we have to keep in mind, major areas in this topic that the DOE has communicated to us is, and I don't know if any of you have been tracking state aid, but we did receive our state aid allocation in March. They actually reran the numbers for all the districts in May. And basically what happened is districts who were receiving increases for this current year, the 2021 year, For the most part, those increases were rolled back. Middletown's allocation did not change in May because we were already a district that was losing money, losing state aid under S2. So no adjustment was made to our aid at that time. But, you know, they just want all the districts to keep in mind that until the state finalizes its budget, and that's been extended out to September 30th being the end of the budget year, it's normally June 30th. Nothing will be as final. So we need to be prepared for the possibility of further adjustments, although nothing's been communicated to us at this time that that's going to happen. But it's just something we have to keep in the picture. There's also going to be several district policies and regulations that will need to be revised or created based on these NJDOE guidelines, particularly in the areas of health screenings for student and staff, attendance policies, other policies that would affect our employees regarding the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. So these are policies that we're looking at and we'll be looking to revise over the next couple of months. Another topic under funding, you know, we also are exploring all of the grant funding that would, or other aid that would be helping us out in this area or with the preparation and the reaction to this crisis. We did receive a CARES Act allocation, which we are utilizing to fund some programs next year. And anything that would be eligible for FEMA funding, we're also submitting that as well. And that, you know, can even include things like staff PPE and purchases along those lines. So we are utilizing that to the fullest extent that we can as well. The next slide talks about what's included in the roadback plan for 10 critical areas of operation that schools must address in their restart plans. So we've listed those 10 areas here. I'm not, you know, we won't read them through line by line, but, you know, it's really things that are not the direct instructional plan, but more along the lines of health and safety and cleaning and meals and transportation and use of facilities. And what we've done is we've identified which one of our district subcommittees is dealing with the particular items in this list of 10. So you can see that there's 4 subcommittees listed here: our health and safety subcommittee, facilities and operations, transportation, then we have an athletics and co-curriculars and before and after care subcommittee. In addition to those committees, we have other subcommittees that deal with funding, learning, SEL, mental health, and technology. But the committees that are listed here are the ones that are dealing with these 10 critical areas of operation.
Hi, my name is Kathy Grano. Eileen Gavin and I are the co-lead nurses in the district. We are going to share some of the work that our Health and Safety Committee has done in addressing guidelines for school reentry. General health and safety guidelines, they say that we must provide reasonable accommodations for staff and students at higher risks for illness and promote behaviors that reduce the spread of illness, such as social distancing, hand washing, and use of face coverings. Screening PPE in response to student and staff presenting symptoms. So we must adopt policies to safely and respectfully screen students and employees for symptoms and history of exposure, and find a way to safely and respectfully isolate those students from others and staff from others.
So I am Eileen Gavin. I am the other co-lead nurse. I'm the nurse at High School North. We're also need to look into contact tracing. School districts should collaborate with local health departments and engage their school nurses to develop contact tracing policies and procedures, as well as educate the broader school community on the importance of contact tracing. And student flow, entry, exit, and common areas. So this will establish the process and the location for students and staff health screening. This should include providing physical guides such as tape on the floor or sidewalks that are marked, signed on the wall to ensure that staff and student remain at least 6 feet apart. When it is not possible to maintain physical distancing, schools must require the use of face masks. So the next slide is as Ms. Walker had said, this is the road back. This is the cover of it. It's the road back and the restart and recovery plan for education from the Department of Education. And these guidelines came out just a couple of weeks ago, and the reentry committees have been working on different aspects of the plan to ensure that the students and the staff return to school in the safest and healthiest way. This is not an easy road. We will be faced with obstacles and roadblocks along the way. At times, we may need to call on our community partnerships, such as the health department, to get us headed in the right direction, and ask that you please know our staff and administration understand the importance of students being present in school, but know there are guidelines and directions that must be followed as we find our way back to school as we know it, as we will know it. We ask that the board, parents, and students know we all have a role to play for a safe return on the road back to our schools. We would like to share the initial plans, and they are continuing to develop, that our Health and Safety Committee have been working on.
So the overarching goal is to create an environment of health and safety where staff and students can engage in an engaging or create an engaging learning environment. As we all know, information and guidelines regarding COVID-19 are constantly changing, so we have to keep that in mind. But there are a number of essential tools to help protect our school community against the spread of COVID-19 and other contagious illness, including social distancing, face coverings, hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette, staying home when sick, and contact tracing. So we are creating an arrival screening process. We are currently looking into different apps or programs that can be used for our staff and our students. This screening has to be completed prior to arrival on school grounds. If we can just click into the student survey, I can show you guys an example of what this screening may look like. And if you could scroll down, so we are collecting some basic information. One form would have to be completed for each student before you come to school. And if you keep scrolling down, it has all of these symptoms that are associated with COVID-19. So it specifically asks, within the past 24 hours, has your child experienced any of the following symptoms? And it asks you to click on if they have any of those symptoms. Further on down the screener, it asks if you click the next there, Chris, on the bottom, it asks, okay, you can't do that. It asks if you have been exposed to someone who is tested positive or someone who has COVID-like symptoms. It also asks if you've been on quarantine, and when your quarantine ends. So there are questions on the screener for both staff and students that we are looking to have done each day. Chris, if you can go back to the other slide. What we really want to emphasize is please keep your students and staff to also stay home when you're sick. We are really trying to decrease the risk of spread in our community. And one of the biggest things you can do to help us is keep them home and communicate. Call your school nurse, let them know what is going on and what kind of symptoms your child is having. So when you do that screener, if you have a positive screening, we're going to say, stay home and talk to your school nurse. If it's negative, which means you don't have any of those conditions or experiences, then you can come into school. And as will be mentioned later, we're going to try to utilize a number of different entrances that are manned by school personnel in order to facilitate safe entry into the building. Next slide, Chris.
Slide, Chris. So this is the flow, entry, exit, and common area. So we're looking at social distancing signage at entrances, common areas, hallways, exit. In the hallways, we're looking at making them one-way hallways. Face coverings must be worn in areas where social distancing cannot be maintained. School staff are required to wear a face covering unless doing so inhibits the individual's health. Hallways, lines for entrances in the buildings need to have social distant markers, and all gathering places. All visitors to the building are by appointment only. We're trying to limit non-essential visits to the health office. We are asking parents to really encourage healthy habits and through our PE and health curriculum for adequate sleep, eating healthy, stress reduction strategies to decrease those non-essential health office visits. We are hopefully planning on using other personnel for social emotional care of our students that sometimes end up in the health office. We have we are planning on educating staff, students, and their families at the same time to explain why this is important. We've developed a staff training about our social distancing and our procedures. Next question.
So we are working on procedures for symptomatic staff and students that present during the school day. So any student or staff presenting with COVID-like symptoms will be sent home immediately. We really need to emphasize that we need our parent and emergency contacts up to date, and those people need to be able to arrive on the property quickly. Each school will have a designated isolation space. Facilities has been working really hard to identify and create these areas. So if a student's presenting symptoms, they will go to the isolation space where they will be supervised and receive care until picked up by an adult. They will be asked to wear a medical grade mask as they leave school grounds and be released via a designated school exit, whichever one is closest to the isolation room. Any emergencies, 911 will be called, and we will advise everyone to seek medical care who are presenting with those type of symptoms. Next slide, Chris. Those that report positive results for COVID-19 or have close contacts positive for COVID-19 will follow the New Jersey Department of Health isolation and quarantine guidelines. And Eileen's going to talk about that in a little bit. Virtual home instruction will be available for students following the isolation quarantine protocol as appropriate. Staff members following isolation quarantine will refer to human resources. We are going to have to instill methods to assist in contact tracing. So recording groups of students, staff, attendants, so that we as a school can identify which students the person who tested positive had been around within close contact. And we will look at readmission for student and staff based on our Department of Health guidance. Next slide, Chris.
So what if you or your child has symptoms? We're really encouraging everyone to stay home and isolate. Isolate is staying even in your household, separate from everyone in your household. Try to use a separate bedroom, bathroom, as much as you can. So most people with COVID have mild illness and they can recover at home. We do encourage you to reach out to your healthcare provider though, and they are encouraging if you're symptomatic to go for testing. Do not leave your home except for getting medical care. Do not visit public places. Self-isolate if you're sick. It'll help decrease the spread of the illness. And take care of yourself, get rest, stay hydrated. Call before you go for medical care, and make sure to get emergency care if you have trouble breathing, have any emergency warning signs such as pain in your chest or pressure in your chest and confusion. Or if you think it is an emergency, you need to have yourself seen. So this is what I wanted to explain to you. So isolation, so if a student or a staff member has symptoms or has tested positive for COVID-19, they must isolate at home. So the isolation is a minimum of 10 days and since the onset of symptoms. So 10 days since the onset of symptoms. If you look at the calendar below, the red dates are those 10 days. So the symptoms started on the 1st, they have to isolate to the 10th. Plus, they have to have at least 3 days, no fever, and have improving symptoms. So those 3 X's on the last 3 days of isolation, if there's no fever and improving symptoms, they can return to school on the 11th. Now, if they test positive and they're asymptomatic, the 10 days is from the day of the test. They have to stay home for 10 days from the day they were tested. Chris, can you move on to the next one, please? So once there is someone that's confirmed COVID-19, we have to look at the close contacts that person has come in contact with. So a close contact is defined as anyone being within 6 feet from the person with COVID-19 for a prolonged period of time, which is 10 minutes. It's defined as 10 minutes by the Department of Health. And having direct contact with infectious secretions of a person with COVID-19, such as being coughed on. And that includes with a mask on or without a mask on. So you could see I added mask to both of those. So it's 6 feet, being within 6 feet, even if you're wearing a mask. And not everyone in the school will be a close contact. We'll be working closely with the health department to determine who that will be. And that's through the contact tracing process. And those that are considered a close contact will be notified by the health department and need to quarantine. We will probably advise them to quarantine, and the health department will follow up with them. And again, this is with and without a mask. Next. So quarantining is for someone that's not sick. It's for someone that is, it's for the close contacts of someone that has either tested positive or symptomatic. So quarantining for close contacts of someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. All those deemed close contacts must stay home for 14 days and observe for symptoms of COVID. So COVID-19 testing is recommended, but it will not shorten this quarantine. So students and staff that are considered or deemed close contact to a positive case will stay home for 14 days. Next. So I just wanted to give a visual. So on top, there's a bus with some children getting on the bus. And one little girl at the end there, I'm gonna say she tested positive. So we brought her down to the left-hand corner, and she is positive for COVID. She needs to isolate for a minimum of 10 days, plus 3 days, no fever and improving symptoms. So the quarantine scenario are those that are deemed close contacts on the bus. They will all have to stay home for 14 days. So it's something that is a case-by-case basis, and maybe Rich, you can chime in at this point. It's all a case-by-case basis. Rich DiBenedetto is our health officer in Middletown. So we work closely with him to figure these scenarios out on a case-by-case basis. But those that are deemed close contacts will be told that they have to quarantine.
Every case that we get that we're going to investigate, we have to kind of ask around, look around, find out what they did, who they talked to, who they were in contact with. On a bus, it could just be the person sitting next to them, in front of them. If they're hopping around the bus, in this situation, they could take out potentially, half the bus. So one person who's positive can affect multiple people. And then that becomes another issue when we're sending them home. So as Ms. Gavin had said, that we're going to isolate someone for 10 days. Now, if that person is isolated at home and has other family members that go to school, go to work, they're going to be stuck home for 14 days on quarantine with the person who's on isolation. So the person on isolation, they are finished with their isolation, say on day 10, day 10, they're fine, no fever for 72 hours. They're done, they're deemed discharged. Now starts the actual quarantine for the rest of the family. So maybe it's mom, it's dad, maybe it's the brother who goes to one of the other schools. We're going to keep them at home also now for an additional 14 days from the end of the isolation period, because we're going to look for any kind of incubation that is anywhere from 2 to 14 days. Nothing happens after 14 days, no other signs or symptoms, they're free to go back to school and to work. If all of a sudden somebody gets signs or symptoms on day 5, day 10, or even say day 14, because we've had that happen before, now they can be isolated for another 10 days until they're better. So they could have been 10 days for the other sibling in the house to be finish their isolation. 14 days after that, so we're up to almost 24 days of now you're finishing your quarantine. And on that 24th day, if you become ill, they may be home now for another 10 days if they are positive for COVID-19. So you could be looking up to a month, and everybody else in the house that can't strictly isolate. And very few people have been able to strictly isolate. From the 785 cases that we've had so far, very few have the ability to have an extra apartment, a finished basement that has its own bathroom, where its own kitchen, where someone can kind of isolate and almost be like in their own little hotel room. So you have to kind of look at the, what they do, and make sure that when you send your children to school, that they're not fooling around, that they're not, that they're keeping social distancing. Because even with the masks on, still doesn't matter. If they're within 6 foot, if they're a close contact, as Ms. Gavin said, we don't care. That's still a close contact. The only time is when you're wearing an N95 mask that's been fit tested, and that's only going to happen in healthcare. That's the only time you can be closer than 6 foot and not be a close contact. We're not even talking that. It's apples and oranges today. So you really have to, look at the whole family is going to, this happens all the time when we do our investigations. You can't start that quarantine until the isolation is finished. So this could go on, and if we've seen a lot of household clusters, and this can go on we've seen it for 45 days by the time all said and done. Getting a test is great, but it only talks about the moment in time that you're tested. That's your negative. The minute after, 10 minutes later, the next day, you can still become positive. So, if you're showing signs and symptoms, absolutely, let's get tested. Let's make sure what it is, because we want to get you on isolation and get you away from everybody else. So you can see the impact it's going to have on the bus, in the schools, in the classrooms, in the hallways. Maintain social distancing is, it's an education that we have to give to community, and to have the children really kind of take that very seriously, because today we are seeing the numbers kind of spiking on the younger, population. And it might only be because we're testing them more now. Prior to this, we really weren't. I don't think there was much of a need, or at least the parents didn't see with the doctors because they weren't showing signs and symptoms. But now that's what we're seeing.
Thank you, Rich. I think the next one, Chris.
Next one.
Please.
So part of our considerations in our health and safety committee meetings and our consultation with the Middletown Health Department with Rich has been, when can these children return to school? As you hear, it's a complicated process sometimes. So staff and students need to have a reentry meeting with the school nurse or designated personnel for clearance for in-person school attendance. So first off, we have to follow the New Jersey Department of Health guidelines for isolation and quarantine. But what if a student or staff wants to return before the end of their isolation period? Well, they must present proof of a negative COVID test and a medical note with an alternate diagnosis. All contacts must complete the full 14-day of quarantine. And if someone becomes symptomatic during the quarantine period, please call and let your nurse know so we can have another conversation.
The next one, Chris. And these are just our resources. The links are available there for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if the presentation is concluded.
No, we have more slides. I was just unmuting
Okay,
myself.
sorry.
Mrs. Rogers. So our next slide that we have to talk to everybody about is our Facilities and Operations Subcommittee update. These are components, again, of the NJDOE guidelines that we are highlighting and that we are looking at in our committee, along with other things, talking about the guidance given for classrooms, testing, and therapy rooms, about allowing for social distancing to the maximum extent possible, and when it's not possible or difficult, face coverings being required. Cleaning practices, again, we must develop a schedule for increased cleaning and disinfecting, especially of frequently touched surfaces and objects. We had already started doing that back in March, before we had closed the schools, and we have really worked on over the summer getting not only new cleaning routines and practices, but also we've invested in quite a bit of new cleaning equipment, which will really help us in these endeavors for next year. As far as recess and physical education goes, we need to take a look at our outdoor spaces. And when the students are outdoors, we need to have markings for separation between students. And it talks about recess periods being staggered, limiting the amount of students out there at one time. The guidance also talks about closing locker rooms, encouraging students to wear comfortable clothing and safe footwear to school so that we wouldn't need the locker rooms to change. We've also talked about playground and gym equipment use and how we would be approaching the cleaning in those areas. For meals, we've, the guidance talks about staggering eating times. And again,
I think Mrs. Doherty's internet may have frozen,
something that we're
so
going to have to, this is the reason why we talked about, ideas such as, having lunches in other rooms, classrooms and so forth. We
Mrs.
also,
Doherty, you froze for a moment there, so I'm not
Okay.
sure if there was anything that you said in between the
I was
guidance
talking
and-
about meals, so I'll go back to meals and, just talking about staggering eating times. It talks about discontinuing buffet style dining, maintaining social distancing. The New Jersey Department of Agriculture has extended the ability for districts to offer food in a grab and go scenario, which isn't the norm, when we serve school breakfast and lunch. But, being able to take prepackaged items and go somewhere else to have the meal. So all of these things are areas that we're talking about in our Facilities and Operations Subcommittee. If we can go to the next slide. We've already touched upon the area of transportation. We do have a transportation subcommittee. We've talked about the guidance saying that school districts should maintain social distancing practices on buses to the maximum extent practicable and adopt best practices for cleaning and disinfecting vehicles. If social distancing is not possible, students who are able to wear face coverings must do so on the bus. And in reviewing our transportation model and the amount of buses that are available to us and what we would be able to use, we have determined that we would not be able to provide transportation and maintain 6-foot distancing on buses. Therefore, we are looking at a model where students who ride the bus would be wearing a face covering on the bus. And we've also been taught, our transportation subcommittee does include 3 of our transportation contractors because we felt it was important to have them on the ground floor of the conversation. And they've had good input as far as ideas and ways to run these routes. And they're also going to be key in helping us provide transportation with whatever in-person instructional model that we end up utilizing for the fall. If it includes some sort of schedule change that we would have to adapt our routes to. But one of the things that is a concern for them, just as it's a concern for us, is their staffing. I mean, as all of us know, the buses are driven by adults. They say, a lot of our drivers are, could be a second career for them. They may be older. These are people that are probably going to want to take more precautions. They may be more susceptible to things. And, we've had these discussions even before COVID and this pandemic about the difficulty in getting drivers and keeping them on bus routes because of the increased testing requirements and so forth. So this is just adding to that burden. And, while we can approach our other staff in the district and say, if somebody was, and referencing back to the discussion we just had on quarantining and isolating and, if we have drivers or, who become subject to quarantining and isolation and so forth, you can't drive a bus virtually. So this is going to mean that if we do not have drivers for routes, it may be very difficult to cover that. So we have to keep this all in mind. And, when we roll out a plan for in-person instruction next year, we are going to have to make sure that everyone understands that there's going to be some things that we don't have control over, and we can all do the best we can, and we can work to meet everybody's needs. But there may be some things that we're not going to be able to change, and we may have to adapt to. And that's where we are with the Transportation Subcommittee.
My name is Rich Carroll. I'm the athletic director for the district. I co-chair the extracurricular and athletic committee with Mr. Stephen Graziano. I'm going to speak to the athletic piece of this. Currently for the summer, we are following the New Jersey State Interscholastic Athletic Association guidelines. It's a 5-phase return to play So far, the first two phases are out there. They're attached to the slide. And these guidelines are much more conservative than the so-called youth sport, that you see put out by the state of New Jersey. So things that you see in AAU basketball and travel soccer are much different than we can do at this point. The district started phase one to this morning. We had about 100 students at both high schools. A great job by the athletic trainers in screening. Phase one is very limited what you can do. It's more conditioning activity. Each student had to fill out a screening survey, kind of like the nurses spelled out before they got there. We took temperatures. We kept athletes in groups of 10, and they were really limited on what they can do as far as, equipment and things like that. There was no indoor activity allowed at this point. That's a 2-week period. And then we will go to phase two, and things kind of ramp up a little bit. We go to groups of 25 to 30. It allows for some indoor activity, allows for more weight room equipment, and expands the use of athletic equipment. Also, the NJSI has just released a timeline as far as what the fall season will look like at this point. The summer session, which again started today, will run through the end of August, August 28th. At that time, we will go into a 2-week period of virtual contact only with coaches. So the beginning of school, there will be no practices. Our fall practice season will start September 14th for practices and scrimmages. And then our regular season for most sports will start around October 1st. So everything on the website for the athletic schedule will be reworked. We're currently reworking all of our schedules. And the middle school schedules will kind of follow the same suit with that. Some of the big questions that come up, there has been no discussion as far as spectators at sporting events or anything like that. That has not been breached. We're still in the summer session and looking ahead to the fall. Mr. Graziano, you want to pick up for the extracurricular?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Carroll. My name is Stephen Graziano. I'm Director of Arts and Business, K-12 for our district. Good evening, everybody. So as far as the extracurricular piece, we're going to start first with our marching band, because our marching band will be out there with our students and our athletes. So that being said, we're going to be following the NJSIAA phases as well for our marching band as they bring themselves back and start acclimating for practices as well. Also the contact tracing, all of that, everything that the student tests, everything that they're doing for the athletes, they will be doing for our marching band students. Also moving forward, we don't have a lot of guidance yet for the inside piece of any of the, let's say, like shows, things moving forward in the fall. So we will be waiting for further guidance from the state in regard to that, and our county as well, moving forward as far as that goes. But again, for extracurricular, things like clubs, everything like that as well, we are going to be looking to follow the same NJSIAA when we're doing that as well, phasing it back in carefully in small groups slowly and monitoring our students and staff very carefully. And that's all we have for that.
Mrs. Caruso, I don't know if I think you're muted.
My apologies. Okay. My name is Marjorie Caruso. I'm District Director of Curriculum Instruction here in Middletown. The next component of the plan is continuity of learning for all students. We currently have subcommittees working on each of the following to help us decide how the district will implement the following state guidelines. To ensure the delivery of special ed and related services to students with disabilities, to ensure student access to a device and internet connectivity, to build capacity of the staff to deliver highly effective instruction in the hybrid environment, as well as preparing them to address any learning gaps that might prevent students from meeting the grade level New Jersey student learning standards, to assess the English language learners' level of engagement and access to in-person, virtual, or hybrid learning environments, to provide meaningful professional development for all of our staff related to social emotional learning, virtual hybrid instruction, and health and safety protocols, and to develop meaningful assessment strategies and expectations to identify the learner's unique needs and learning gaps when present. Okay, we have school-based teams who will be analyzing school and student data and support the staff in addressing the students' academic and their social emotional needs. For example, the IRNRS teams, child study teams, learning design teams, among others. Next slide, Mr. Rotolo. Okay, Ms. Tiedemann, did you want to cover the first couple of items on this one?
Yes, hi everyone. So we have a number of things going on this summer that Mrs. Caruso and I will review. We have our special education ESY, our extended school year program. We're actually running 2 programs simultaneously. There is a fully virtual program that some parents opted for, and then we have a hybrid program that is 22 days. 12 of those days are virtual instruction and 10 of those days are in person as part of the hybrid. The first 2 days of the program are virtual for all students. Staff will be participating in different levels of training, proper use of PPE, social emotional learning, so that we can ease the kids back into school. Then our students are 2 cohorts. Cohort A will come to school for the next 2 weeks in person, then revert to virtual, and cohort B will do the opposite. For our ESY program, we have a total of 258 students participating. We have 95 students doing the fully virtual program, and we have 163 students split between the 2 cohorts coming into our in-person program. We have therapists on hand to help the students with the social emotional aspects of transitioning back to school, building their stamina to be back in the school building. We have behavioral support specialists with us, teachers, paras, very dedicated staff, all happy to be a part of ESY this year. There also this summer are some social emotional activities going on virtually. There are a number of different platforms being used, Google Classroom, different social media platforms. There are a number of staff members who are working together for that. They're creating these Google Classroom virtual platforms and engaging students and families in different social emotional activities as we prepare to wrap up the summer and move forward with the new school year. I'll let Mrs. Caruso pick up with our tiered system of support.
The next item on the list is the SOAR program, which stands for Summer Opportunities for Academic Readiness. In this program, in ELA and in mathematics, students in grades K through 8 will be provided small group targeted instruction beginning on July 27th and going through August 21st. We have 288 students in the literacy program, and I don't have the exact number for the math program. However, it's a little bit less than the 288 in literacy. Students will receive 8 to 10 30-minute sessions for each content area. Teachers are being flexible in scheduling with parents 1 of 3 times of day that they can have instruction, 9 to 11 a.m., 1 to 3 p.m., or 3 to 6 p.m. Okay. The next item on here is the Advanced Placement Summer Program, which is brand new this year, the way we're doing it, in place of the traditional summer assignments that we've done. Based on the past 3 months of school, we thought this was a much better opportunity for our students. The registration for it just closed last week, and we have over 450 students registered to take over 950 individual classes. It's a jumpstart for 24 different AP courses being taught by 39 of our AP teachers during the month of August. The following item, Algebra 2 Jumpstart Program. We have done this before in Middletown, but it's all the more important this year after the 3 months that we've been on virtual instructions. Algebra 1 is the foundation course for high school mathematics. So it's very important that students have a firm foundation in Algebra 1 prior to starting Algebra 2. So all of the students who are registered for Algebra 2 next year had the opportunity to sign up for this program. 160 students have already enrolled in the Algebra 2 Jumpstart program. We approved tonight on the agenda a 3rd teacher to help teach the program because the demand is so great. The sessions will be taking place online in August. The last program on the list is the teacher-student book clubs. The district's first summer reading book club program is taking place in July and August and currently involves 174 students. There are 17 book clubs for grades 3 to 5, 13 in grades 6 to 8, and 8 for the high school. The purpose of the program is to invite students to formulate opinions and discuss stories from a wide array of genres. Sessions range in length from 20 minutes at the elementary level to 60 minutes at the high school level. There are still a few available start dates and titles that students can choose from, and parents can access information about this program at the MTPS Pride Summer Learning Guide, which is located on each school's website. Okay, thank you. Next slide, Mr. Rotolo.
Okay, at this time, we wanted to do a little bit of a review for our community. There was interest in seeing the results and the outcomes of our both the 2 surveys that the district launched last week. One was for our caregivers, our parents in the community, as well as another one that was shared with our staff members. So the survey responses have been reviewed for the caregiver survey to eliminate any duplicates or erroneous submissions. We had some that were started but not completed. So we needed to make sure that the data that we're presenting tonight had been vetted, and that was done. The main purpose of the caregiver survey was to really gauge our community members, our parents, our caregivers' attitudes about different health and safety measures, some of which, quite honestly, the DOE guidelines require implementation of. Others, there's flexibility. We also wanted to get feedback on the attitudes and perception of our virtual instruction model that was launched in the spring, as well as returning parents' comfort, caregiver comfort, and returning students to in-person and on-campus instruction. In the event that regular schedules are not feasible, once the district implements and plans for the guidelines that we are bound to implement as per the NJDOE, the CDC, and the Department of Health, we did propose alternative schedules to gauge community members' interests and thoughts about where they were thinking what would best serve their student and their family's needs. We also surveyed parents to identify needs for technology and internet connectivity, transportation, and childcare as they all factor into our decision-making. If you can go on, Mr. Rotolo. So this presentation, the entire slide deck, will be available on our district website. What we did to consolidate, quite honestly, the slide deck, there are several, as you can see here, 4 hyperlinks to the data summary. The first one is the complete data set, all 6,661 recorded and verified submissions. That represents individual students. If you completed the survey, you know that parents, caregivers were asked to submit a survey for each one of their children who will be attending Middletown Public Schools next year. So that 6,661 represents a large portion, as we have tentatively projected about 9,600 students attending our schools for the 2021 school year. So then the rest of the links go to the breakdown of data summary by grade level types, building level served, so the elementary, middle school, and high school. And Mr. Rotolo, if you can just click on the first hyperlink there, we're going to quickly go through, because anyone, again, this will be available for anyone to peruse. We're going to give some highlights of the survey analysis and results here from a district-wide perspective. So the first community question, obviously we're not going to speak to any specific student identifiable information. That's only for administrative purposes and planning. So we're skipping right to the community question section of the survey. And that first question asked for respondents to give us their comfort level at the time, last week when they were completing this, and sending this student, who they were filling it out for, back to school on campus for in-person instruction. And you can see there that the responses, those who felt they were very comfortable at this time were around 38% of parents, somewhat comfortable, 44% or so, and not comfortable, about 18%. If you can just scroll through, Mr. Rotolo. And then the next community question asked, if campuses were to reopen in some capacity for the fall, how likely are you to send this student to school for in-person on-site instruction? 67% of respondents indicated they are likely. 27% or so were undecided at this time, and about 7% are unlikely to do so. So the next the next question actually presented a series of safety measures that we asked parents to let us know which ones they felt were most important, when would make them most comfortable in sending their child to school for in-person on-site instruction. We asked them to gauge that of those choices. The choice that received the most amount of responses was frequent hand washing and sanitizing, followed by daily health screenings of students and staff. At 65% of respondents felt that that was important and would make them comfortable, followed by reducing foot traffic in the hallways. And then a series of responses were very close, all again involving some form of social distancing or creating of cohorts, eliminating the use of cafeterias and other large group spaces, implementing maximum social distancing guidelines, and maximum, as per the CDC and the NJDOE, would be considered that 6-foot recommended distance. Staggering student drop-off, again, another form of social distancing. Requiring face coverings be worn by staff and students at all times. Parents chose that as something that would make them comfortable at a rate of 36%. And just to note, in some of the responses, you'll notice that there were answer choices that were originally crafted in the survey. And upon review of the survey, they were deemed to be either duplicate or redundant in some cases. And this is an example there in that question. So if you see 0%, this means that that survey answer choice was deactivated for the survey. If you can go ahead, Mr. Ruotolo. The next thing we asked the community to give us feedback on was their experience, their child's experience with virtual home instruction this past spring. And you can see there that roughly 29% responded that their child's experience was positive, 44% approximately was neutral, and approximately 27% had a negative, felt they had a negative experience. And that's something that we then asked them for follow-up questions on. If you indicated further in the survey that a virtual or online experience was something that you were exploring, we really want to improve upon that model for those individuals. So the next question was premised as assuming current health and safety requirements remain unchanged and NJDOE social distancing guidelines remain unchanged. In the unlikely, if it's unlikely schools will operate on a normal schedule, we therefore then presented a series of alternative types of schedules to gauge the community's interest if we are unable to resume a normal schedule in September, and interest in those various models. Obviously, everyone would love to resume normal operation and schedules, but if that is not possible, the results showed that approximately, in this case, when we asked respondents to rank, 75% chose hybrid in-person learning as their first preference, followed by MTPS online, which is a tag name that we use to differentiate between an online synchronous and asynchronous experience where students could be following along with a class and receiving live instruction, versus a virtual homeschool experience where students are presented with curriculum and activities, and a teacher is available for office hours and for check-ins and some scheduling of some instruction. But that's really more of a flexible model for families who prefer that type of schedule. And then following that, we did then ask everyone to indicate which one would be the likely choice. Again, no one was being asked to make a selection at this time. This was for planning purposes and collection of information to inform our decision-making. And as you can see here, the overwhelming responses were for a hybrid in-person model. roughly 82% of respondents chose that type of learning. About 9% chose the remote learning from home, following along with the class from home, and 9% roughly chose the more flexible virtual homeschool model. So with that being said, depending on the choices that the survey respondent submitted for question number 11, they were then branched off to different subsequent questions as follow-ups. So the next set of questions were presented to the individuals who chose the hybrid in-person model, so that we could gauge and get some feedback regarding what preferences there may be for that model if it is necessary. Priorities for in-person instruction if we were not able to resume a normal schedule. The first priority the priority that received the most amount of responses indicating it was their first priority was addressing core curriculum content, followed by supports for struggling students, then support and related services such as speech, OT, gifted and talented, ESL, then social emotional activities and lessons, followed by special subjects and electives should be given priority in an in-person hybrid model. Then those same respondents were asked to give us their preference for what types of schedules may be options that we would vet out. And in that case, in-person on-site instruction over multiple days in a week received the most responses as their first choice or preference, followed by 1 time a week in-person instruction. And the one that received the least amount of selections as their number 1 choice was alternating weeks. We do just want to note, you can see here some of the other things that we were discussing at the time that this survey was being created. One of the things was an extended school day with alternating split sessions. So a school day wherein by students would come to school either in an AM or PM session. We were unsure at the time of launching the survey if that was feasible. But, we have a whole host of options that right now the administrative team and the district committee is exploring to see what actually the district would be able to implement. So following along, then we asked parents, caregivers who indicated that in-person hybrid model would be a preference, again, if normal schedules could not be implemented. This was really about face coverings and student access to face coverings, just so that we could gauge and prepare for how many face coverings we may need to supply to students. You can see that the vast majority of parents and caregivers indicated they would be able to supply their student with a face mask or a face covering to wear to school. And then the next question was regarding their availability to pick up the child should they be ill, immediate access to that. And you can see the overwhelming amount of individuals indicated that would be possible, which is important, as Nurse Kathy and Nurse Eileen just indicated. The next set of questions really followed along the lines of, again, safety measures that would be considered important to the respondents. A vast majority of parents indicated that thoroughly cleaning and disinfecting the schools at least once during the school day was important. And Mr. Rotolo, you can keep scrolling. The next question was the requirement to wear staff and students to wear face masks at all times. This one did receive some mixed responses. 37% felt that was very important, 41% somewhat important, and 21% not important. Although we do know that as per the NJDOE guidelines, anytime we are unable to maintain a 6-foot social distancing, that will be required for anyone who is in person and on campus. You can keep going, Mr. Rotolo. The next one was, again, about washing hands and doing it multiple times per day. It followed suit that it was similar to the responses in an earlier question in the survey. And then the next question was the availability of hand sanitizer stations in the classroom. And you can see, again, an overwhelming majority of respondents felt that was important in the in-person model. The limitation of visitors and volunteers on campuses, the overwhelming majority of respondents indicated that that was very important, followed by another significant portion who thought it was somewhat important. The next thing that the NJDOE asked us to consider and get community feedback was regarding student interaction with others outside of their classes. So this is really along the lines of that cohort premise or model. And you can see that about 33% of respondents thought that that was very important, and about 44% thought it was somewhat important. Another consideration the NJDOE asked us to put toward, include in our thinking and gauge public sentiment was another premise of the cohort model, which is keeping students grouped together throughout the day. Again, limiting contact with other individuals. And the results here were similar to the previous question. You can keep going, Mr. Rotolo. And here was, again, social distancing on school buses and the sentiment of the public and the respondents with regard to running the school buses below capacity to accommodate social distancing. And about 36% indicated that was very important, and about 36% indicated it was somewhat important as well. Bus drivers and students being required to wear masks on buses, 55% thought that that was very important, and about 25% thought it was somewhat important. Again, in the event that we cannot maintain 6-foot social distancing, and Mrs. Doherty addressed this, it's unlikely we will be able to do that and still run our routes. Students would be required in those instances to wear the face masks. Adults are always required. So the next set of questions was where respondents were directed if they indicated that an online or a virtual homeschool model was something that they were interested in pursuing for their student. And here we were trying to gauge, again, how we can improve upon that model and areas in which respondents thought actions would be important to enhance their child's experience. And from there, you can see that the majority of respondents indicated that live daily instruction was something that could enhance that experience. That would be from a teacher or a support specialist, then followed by a variety of ways to learn, including traditional pen and paper tasks, pencil paper tasks, small group work, instructional videos, again, a variety of methodologies implemented, followed by access to teachers and specialists for students, in supplying them with interactive materials such as manipulatives and leveled books and readers. And also an easier way to monitor student progress. There was some preference for that. Virtual extracurriculars was the least responded to item. Then we were asking parents if you were pursuing or interested in an online or virtual homeschool experience. We needed to gauge an understanding of how many of our elementary students would require a device or internet connectivity. As you know, in Middletown, all students grades 6 through 12 are issued a one-to-one device. So really here it was gauging how many additional devices would have to be deployed as one-to-one devices. And about 31%, 32% of respondents said that they would need a Chromebook for an elementary student, and about 3% need assistance with internet connectivity. The next thing that the DOE asked us to gauge was childcare needs of our community. And this question was aimed at collecting that type of data. So based on the responses, we see here that approximately 65% of the respondents indicated that they would not need to arrange childcare for the student that they were submitting the survey for, regardless of any schedules that are implemented. And followed by 20% who would need to arrange childcare on the days the student would, in the event that they were scheduled for hybrid or virtual instruction. About 20% of respondents said those would be the days they would need to seek additional childcare arrangements. Following that, then the DOE asked us to survey the community regarding transportation needs. This question was really meant to identify students who are eligible for district-provided transportation. And of the over 6,000 response, or almost 5,500 responses to this question, about half of the respondents indicated that that student was eligible for transportation. If you selected yes to that question, then you were prompted to the next and final question of the survey, which is if an in-person hybrid instructional model is implemented, meaning students are going to be transported on campus at some point, would you be interested in waiving this option? And about 42% of those parents whose students are eligible for transportation indicated they would be interested in exploring a waiver option for transportation. So that is the summary of the district-wide perspective of survey responses. Again, Mr. Rotolo will click back. You'll see that in the presentation, if you would like to look at, we're not going to do that tonight, feel free to look at how the data breaks down by grade level content grade level areas, I'm sorry. And I think Mrs. O'Hagan, you're going to discuss the results of our staff survey.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlene, District Director of Human Resources and Instruction. About 2 weeks ago, we released a survey with all staff members. And it's very important for you to know that when we say all staff members, we do mean that. Teachers, paraprofessionals, custodians, security guards, administrators, everyone who works in our district was sent a survey link and asked to complete the survey to tell us where they are right now in their thinking regarding their ability to come back to school and work with students or in whatever capacity their job would have them work in person and on site. I do want to make sure that you understand that their responses were based upon a very long preface that we included where we explained what the safe guidelines on the road back would involve. And Nurse Gavin, Nurse Grano, and Mr. Benedetto, head of the Middletown Health Department, did a wonderful job explaining what those guidelines were so that you'll understand that when people gave answers, it was with the understanding that the guidelines would be in place. So when asked if you could return with those guidelines, would you be able to return to on-site, in-person instruction with no additional accommodations? And we had approximately 78% of the respondents said that they would not need additional accommodations other than those that were in the CDC and NJDOE guidelines. 22% indicated that they would need additional accommodations. We did not vet out to any extent what those accommodations may be. We were just getting a general temperature of what the sense of our staff is. We also asked the question about if you were unable to come back to work in person or on site under the CDC guidelines, even with accommodations. And we had approximately, it's cut off on my screen. We had 9.5% or 88 respondents in all of the general categories respond that even with accommodations, they would be unable to return to an in-person, in-site model of support or instruction or delivering of whatever their job capacity makes it necessary for them to deliver. We did have a very strong response. Over 90% of our staff did say that they would be able to respond. They would be able to return to work without additional accommodations, which really is a testament to their desire to get back to school, to return to normal as much as possible. And if the guidelines can be implemented, we have a very strong representation from all the different categories of staff members who feel they would be able to come back without an additional accommodation. That's it.
So the next steps and timelines, first of all, I want to thank everybody for a comprehensive presentation Thank you to our administrators and nurses and Mr. Di Benedetto and everyone who presented for a comprehensive yet concise, but a plethora of information. So the next step is the timelines and the road back. And the timeline set by the State Department of Education is to notify the public at least 4 weeks before we're scheduled to reopen. So our goal is to move our meeting from the 22nd to the 29th and have our final plan available for the public on the 29th. It's really important to note that 150 people are working in subcommittees, and in those subcommittees, and we spend as an administrative team a good portion of our day working through the subcommittees. Those subcommittees represent parent representation, staff representation across the board of our staff. Board members are on that. So we'll be working and moving through multiple plans. Today, we worked with the administrative team. We looked at 7 different potential plans to see and review those at length with the administrative team to get feedback from them. We reviewed those plans tonight with the board. They will next go to subcommittee. We'll review them at that point. From there, that once we identify those final schedule options, we will share that with the parents for them to register for the model. It's important to note that the district calendar is being reviewed for, I would say probable, not possible, but probable revisions because of the additional professional development that's going to be need to take place at the start of this school year to work within the new model. And then finally, the district plan will be submitted to the executive county superintendent as is required for his review, Dr. Lester Richens. So again, I want to thank everybody for your patience and listening. I think at this time, we'll be moving to public comment unless there's any questions or comments first from the board.
Yeah, Dr. George, it's Rob and Stella. More of a comment. I think this might be a really good time for us as a district to really revisit our attendance policy for both students and teachers, as we want to keep everybody safe and healthy. And we don't want anybody feeling like they must rush back to school to avoid, attendance issues. So hopefully that's something we can look at.
Yes, it is our intention to look at that. I was asked by the executive county superintendent to serve on a regional reopening plan with superintendents from across our region. And that was one of our recommendations as well. And I think it's been talked a lot at our county roundtables, and it is the expectation of our school district to revisit that along with other policies as it relates to the new conditions we're facing as a result of COVID-19.
Thanks, Dr. George.
That's also, Robin, being looked at Health and Safety Committee. They're working on revising that policy.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Menuez.
Dr. George, the scenarios range from what now? The 7 scenarios range from full virtual to basically kind of going back to school the way it was prior. There's a sort of a, maybe you could explain.
Yeah, well, as we heard tonight from the presentation from the health professionals, Mr. Di Benedetto, and our nurses and the medical experts, as well as staff, we're looking across the scope and gamut of that which would meet the minimum guidelines of the road back plan. So everything is being discussed. Again, I point out 7 options. It's a little premature, to discuss specifically what those are, because we have to make sure on many levels that, first of all, that we would have the infrastructure within the financial support of our budget to be able to do it, that would meet the health and safety guidelines, the minimum guidelines that are set up by the Department of Education. And also, we're working directly to build consensus with our staff so that we have the best opportunity. We also think it's really important that we have parents as part of the committee, because no matter what option we come up with, and I've heard board members say this tonight, I heard administrators say this today, and I know as a central office team, we've been talking about this for weeks. We're really going to have to work closely together as a community to be able that we can to be able to make sure that we can meet the safety and well-being of our school community. So that's always our students. We are always thinking of our students first and foremost, but it's our staff and it's the community at large, because we're all affected potentially, as was pointed out tonight, by the health pandemic.
Thanks, Dr. George.
Thank you, Mr. Little. So then I think at this time we'll open the
We're ready for public comment? Okay,
Public
sorry,
comment,
my
yes,
internet was
please.
coming in and out. For public comment tonight, we have 3 minutes each for each individual to make sure we get through everybody. I know there's a lot of people who want to speak this evening. It's a 30-minute time limit total. Please state your name and your address.
Okay, we'll start with Lori. I apologize. I can't pronounce the last name, and I don't want to butcher it, so I'll bring you in. Hello?
I can see that Lori is muted on
Yes.
the participant list. I'm not sure. She can unmute herself.
Okay, you know what? Let's move on for now, and we'll.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yep.
Oh, sorry about that. My name is Lori Tejan. I've run a charity in Middletown for almost 20 years, and we have a rental property in town as well. I'd like to start with Dr. George. You and I have known each other through
I'm sorry,
charity
ma'am,
work.
with the speaker, could you please state your name and your address per the request of the board president?
Sure. My name is Lori Tejan. As I said, I've run a charity in Middletown for 20 years. I have a rental property in Middletown, but I'm currently living because of construction in 372B Route 537 in Colts Neck.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with Dr. George. As you know, Dr. George, we've known each other through charity work for a really, really long time. I've spoken to you a couple of times about the BLM protest that took place at Middletown North. And last time we spoke, which was over a week ago, you said you were going to look into some things and get back to me by the end of the day. It's a week later and I'm still waiting. Just want to tell you I'm extremely disappointed in that. But since I only have 3 minutes, I'd like to move on. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a media executive. I was been in the media world for many years, heading up communications for Time Warner, which includes CNN and Time Inc. and many other media, HBO, many other media things. I'm also the sister of a fallen police officer whose name was Ken Tejan. He was a lifelong resident of Middletown and a graduate of Middletown High School North, as was I. Since my brother was killed on 9/11, by the way, giving first aid to a Black woman who his body was found laying on top of hers in the rubble, I've run a charity in town for 20 years. In those 20 years, we've raised almost $10 million that stays locally in our community, a very large portion of it going to the Black residents and Black community here locally in Middletown and Monmouth County. So I find myself in a very unique position of having a lot of love and support for police officers and having a lot of love and support for our Black neighbors. I was very excited when I heard about a unity walk that was going to take place in Middletown. And I even reached out to the organizers in advance to understand if it was actually a unity walk. And I was told in writing that it is, that they were going to erase lines between the sides, that this was not a political event. So I was super excited. And I showed up to the event and it was anything but. It was a full-blown Black Lives Matter police protest. I was there at the event, and not only was our police chief heckled, but some of the students were holding signs, and excuse my language, but these signs were at a school event saying all cops are bastards, F12, which stands for fuck the police.
Okay.
Mr. Rotolo, we can't have that kind of language.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because that's how I felt about this happening at a school.
So excuse me,
I'll
ma'am.
refrain from.
Excuse me, ma'am. This is a public Board of Education meeting. This is not a protest outdoors. We're going to ask you to please conduct yourself with a modicum of decorum, and please watch your language. You've got 30 seconds left. Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. I'm repeating what was there. So my question is, Pam Rogers, I have all the documentation from an Oprah request that you were personally involved in the planning and execution of the event, which I can prove in emails. I have reached out to the board and asked all of you to denounce the hate speech that took place, specifically those signs. Dr. George refused to do that. I have asked to sit down and meet with you and Pam Rogers, and you refused to do that as well. So I want to understand how this took place on school property with Pam Rogers involved in all of the meetings, which I can prove, how that took place at our school.
As you acknowledge, you have 3 minutes to speak. Your 3 minutes are up. We thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I just feel like I need to stick up for myself a little there. That was a little harsh. So there were meetings that we had. The organizers of the march approached Tony Perry, our mayor, Chief Weber, our chief of police. They contacted Dr. George and myself to plan this march. And Mayor Perry was responsible for security for the police. Our district, through Dr. George, was responsible for the security for the district, because our students have a First Amendment right to rally and to march and to speak up. They did so with the Let Them Walk rally, and they did so with the Spread Love, Not Hate Unity March. And I absolutely disagree, ma'am. I know you're not from here. I was there that day, and it was absolutely a beautiful love rally promoting love and not hate. Chief Weber led the march. I have some beautiful pictures of him leading the march. He said a beautiful speech. Mayor Perry sent a speech in. And I just feel like this is part of the sadness of what's going on in America today. The idea that a Black life can matter as much as a white life can exist. That thought can exist simultaneously in the hearts and the minds of good people, with the idea that we respect our police. So a Black life can matter, and the police can matter. And it's a shame that that's not the way some people think, but I think that's what the whole day was about. And I hope that we keep moving forward and speaking to these kids. I always support our students, and I think that we should all support this movement. And I believe that that speaker, Mrs. Tejan, really represented the day, and it's just so unfortunate. I'm very sad about that.
Mrs. Rogers, I just also want to correct the record because this is a meeting on the record. I was there that day as well. There was a heckler who did wait until Chief Weber was finished speaking, and then he did heckle Chief Weber. There was a second heckler that also heckled Chief Weber, and the organizers of the march reminded the crowd that this was not a place for heckling. They admonished those who heckled the chief of police, and they reminded everybody that if they had something to say, that public comment was welcome and people were solicited to speak up, and all voices were welcome, and only 3 people from the public had. I want to commend our students for being so open-minded as to invite and work with our chief of police, as well as to have the courage to speak up and denounce a heckler on the spot. I thought that was, it showed great fortitude by our students. I spoke with Chief Weber that day. Obviously, the utmost respect for him and what his department does. So I think it's important to correct the record. What our commenter had was only half of the story. It's important to have the whole story on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. All right, I think we're ready to move on to our next caller.
Yes, next is Suman Banerjee.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Suman Banerjee. My address is 122 Willow Grove Drive, Lincroft. My daughter goes to Middletown South. One question, see, I'm a professor myself at Stevens Institute of Technology, and we are grappling with all these scenarios that you are talking about. But one scenario that I thought was omitted from your discussion totally is bringing the school year earlier so that we can close the school before the complications of the normal flu season starts. So many school districts are thinking about starting it early because traveling in summer is almost a no-no. Starting it early and finishing it right after the Thanksgiving when the flu kind of starts peaking out. Have you given any thoughts on this idea? I don't know who to direct to, but Pamela might be a person to answer.
Well, I want to speak concisely because it's not our practice normally to get into a back and forth. But since this goes to our next step slides, I just want to let you know that the district calendar and our review of the district calendar, and we are taking into account those timelines around the normal vacations, fall recess, winter recess. When I say fall, I really mean Thanksgiving and the winter holidays, as well as spring recess, looking at the times around them as possibly being virtual to accomplish those goals that you're talking about. I know colleges are starting earlier in August, but school systems cannot start before September 1st, and we do need time early for professional development. So I just wanted to give a little bit more information as it relates to the calendar.
Okay, next is Donna Smith.
Okay, am I there?
Yes.
Okay, I work in a nursing home, and I guess some of the concerns that I have is when you're talking about isolating people after they come in contact with someone. We deal with this every single day, and we don't quarantine our workers for 14 days. We would have no staff. I mean, basically, you're going to end up with a scenario where you're going to have no students.
Hi, it's Eileen Gavin. I think Rich DiBenedetto could also chime in on this. But yes, but a healthcare facility or a medical facility is a different arena than a school environment. So we again have to follow Department of Health guidelines, and you have different guidelines for the healthcare facilities.
Right, but I understand that, but everybody seems to be in a panic over spreading this disease so rapidly. Why isn't it spreading amongst myself and my coworkers and my family if this is all such a big concern? Like, I really would be more interested in factual data that you actually see. I mean, we are spreading this there's very few tracing between us and our coworkers and our families.
Well, I do know, I mean, I am a contact tracer and
Sorry, excuse me, Mrs. Rogers, if I may, excuse me, Mrs. Gavin, I'm sorry, Mrs. Rogers and Dr.
That's
George,
okay.
if we could just let the members of the public speak during their 3 minutes, and then the board and or administration at the direction of Dr. George can respond if necessary, either A, after each speaker, or perhaps preferably after all the speakers have finished their comments.
Okay, sorry.
Protocol.
I mean, I'm basically just going to wrap up and say that I think it's a lot more fear and panic. And I think that it's a lot less spread than everybody is so concerned about. I do see daily where we are tested on a weekly basis. If somebody tests positive, they're included. If they test positive 2 weeks in a row, they're included in those numbers again. So I think the numbers are quite inflated throughout the state. And I just really don't see, I think that you're basically setting this up for failure by saying if my son is in contact or near someone who had it, that he has to go home and be quarantined for 14 days. I just think that you're going to end up in a scenario where everybody's going to be in quarantine.
Okay, thank you. If all of the professionals, if we could just take notes after everybody speaks, and then at the end, I'll just refer to everyone. I think that's the best way to handle it, the most organized way. I'll take the next speaker.
Next is Lisa. There's no last name listed, so if they can state their full name and address, that would be wonderful.
Hi, this is Lisa Leak, 117 Harbor Way in Belford. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
We can hear you.
I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments and then just a couple of questions that hopefully you can answer at one point. I'm speaking as a parent of 3 children in the Middletown district, 2 in elementary, 1 going into middle school. But I also want to speak as a teacher in a neighboring district as well. I want to first acknowledge the enormity of this task that you've been given. Based on so many of the horrific comments that I've seen recently on social media, both directed at you as the board and also the teachers, I've been disgusted in seeing that people seem to believe that it's up to you whether we open full time or not. And I just want to state that that's obviously a misconception, that you guys have to follow the state guidelines. And obviously, you're not able to open until all of those guidelines are met successfully, and if it is even possible to meet them successfully. So it's been very disturbing seeing all the negative comments, especially towards the teachers who have gone above and beyond trying to make everything work. So I did want to make that comment. In reference to the teacher survey, I was curious if you guys are having this problem as well. Like I said, I'm a teacher in the neighboring district. It was very difficult to answer the survey because of obviously childcare. Obviously, it was difficult for me to answer my survey because the decision hasn't been made in neighboring districts of obviously Middletown on how my children will be attending school. So it was very difficult for me to answer my survey, not knowing where my children will be next year. So I'm, curious if you're seeing that kind of issue as well, and, how these teachers can make an adequate decision about their future when obviously they don't know what's going on with their children at the same time. Also, moving forward, since obviously a good portion of next year will be virtual, whether part-time, full-time, whatever it's going to be, I was curious what the district is doing to ensure that there is professional development and everything being put forward to making virtual instruction as positive experience as possible. Obviously, with school starting only 6 weeks away and teachers on summer break right now, what are we doing to make sure that we move forward in the right direction, that we are successful with virtual instruction, that the teachers are receiving professional development, making sure that they have access to everything that they could use over this time to ensure that virtual instruction is moving in the right direction. And just lastly, in reference to special education students, will they be taking the priority when it comes to being, if there's only part-time in-school instruction, will priority be placed for the special needs students? Again, thank you for everything that you're doing. It's an enormous task and it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Amanda Tolp.
Hi, my name is Amanda Tolp. I live at 601 Buchanan Boulevard. I have 2 questions. The first related to the health assessment and that daily screener. And I was curious if you could clarify really what's considered symptomatic? And are you saying that if a student presents with just one of those symptoms, they would have to stay home or be sent home from school? So if they just had a runny nose or if they just had a cough, they would be considered a possible COVID case and be sent home. My other question is related to the NJ DOE guidance. He spoke a lot about being able to pivot potentially to full-time virtual learning again. And I just wanted to know if they gave any guidance for pivoting back to quote unquote normal in-school full-time learning. And if not, if you guys are pressing and asking for that guidance and what the goalposts or targets are to get there. That's it.
Thank you.
Next is Rachel Kanopka.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. My name is Rachel Konopka. My address is 25 Blue Jay Court, Middletown. I first want to also say thank you to everybody. The challenge that you've been given is insane. I mean, the idea of having to maintain a virtual academy while also creating an in-person experience for students all within the same staff and budgets and resources is really almost impossible. And I know nobody wants to be here. We all are. And I really appreciate all the effort that the district is putting in. I'm on one of the subcommittees, and it is amazing, everything that has to be considered. So thank you very much. I realize that nobody wants to be here, like I said, but the job you're doing is really impressive. As it relates to what I wanted to say here, I just want to go through some specific considerations or questions I had, and then some broader ones. And I know you can't answer them, but I'll just kind of read through them because I know I only have the 3 minutes. As it relates to face coverings, I was wondering if there was any direction as to if shields counted. I know masks do, but I've seen a lot of commentary asking if shields would be okay. And also, how do you plan to enforce the wearing of the masks? And what do you do if somebody refuses to, even if they are deemed able to? As it relates to the daily screener, I would suggest that you have parents type in an actual temperature as opposed to just say, my kid doesn't have a fever. I think in order to avoid people just doing kind of the hand on the forehead check, it would be helpful to have a temperature typed in. And I also think to try to stop this from happening, but also include a checkbox that you have not medicated your child with any fever suppressant that morning. It says something about the kids having to provide proof upon arrival at the school. And I'm wondering what exactly will they have to prove? Is it a printout? Is it something they show on a phone? And what happens if the child does not have that proof upon getting to school? My next question has to do with the quarantining. I understand that the goal is to keep the kids 6 feet apart in the classrooms. If a child is in my kid's class and tests positive, is every single person in my child's class going to be put on the mandatory quarantine for 14 days? And I'm wondering if that does happen, do we then have to require some sort of testing before all the quarantined kids come back who were exposed to prove that they were negatives, because they could be an asymptomatic carrier at that point if there was a positive in their class? And I'm assuming also the teacher would have to be quarantined if there was a positive case. And how would that work in terms of sub-instruction for the in-person kids at that point? If you were to select the hybrid model, and then you send your kid to school and realize it's not working, like your child is either freaked out by the 6 feet or the masks, et cetera, can you switch to virtual at any time? One other question about that also, is there a plan to have kids from the same family attending in-person school on the same days for childcare reasons if you have kids within multiple schools? Now I'm getting on to kind of the bigger questions that I had. One big one is, I'm assuming that at some point there's a tipping point, whether it's at the school level or at the district level, that says we have to send everybody home to virtual. We've reached outbreak status. And I'm wondering what that number would be. Is it a percentage? Is it at the school level? Is it at the district level? And how often do we reasonably expect that to happen? And on an average day, I'm wondering how many kids should I expect my child to interact with? How many kids do we think are going to be in each classroom? And is there a maximum that we're trying to keep everybody under to try to minimize their contact with other kids? This is a big one too. What happens if there are not enough teachers who are willing to return back? Do we have a plan to fill in those gaps? And then I guess on the flip side of the tipping point question, what is the tipping point to say, okay, we're ready to open up the doors even bigger and send the kids in for either more days per day or more days per week, I apologize, or more hours per day? And do we expect that that could happen during the school year, or are we expecting that whatever we launch with in September, we're kind of going to stick with through June? And I appreciate that Governor Murphy will have to dictate some of that, but I'm not sure how much discretion the district may have. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Sandy. There's no last name given. So if they could please read in, that would be great.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Hi.
First of all, I'd just like to thank you all. A lot of people don't realize that you are volunteering your time. And I can't thank you enough, because it really does take a tremendous amount of time and effort to do what you all are doing. And it's just so tremendous what it is that you're doing for all of us and our children. So I thank you.
Sandy, I'm sorry, before you continue, could you just state your full name? 'Cause
Oh,
I
I'm
always-
so sorry.
That's
It's
okay.
Sandy Hines, Hines.
Okay,
And I'm at
thank you.
25 Coronet Avenue in
Thank you.
Lincroft. That's in Lincroft. I apologize. But anyway, I can't thank you enough, because this is all volunteer and you don't have to do what you do. And it's just some of the things that you guys have to put up with is unbelievable. You don't deserve it. And you deserve a lot of praise for what you do. And I do really appreciate everything. So just a couple of quick things. One of the things I thought of is Dr. George had brought up before safety. And I think about how things will be in terms of when the children have lockdown, things like that, when they have to do lockdown drills in the school. How is that going to be done when we have social distancing? Because the new ones that are coming, I mean, I have a child that's going into 5th and one that's going into middle school at Thompson, but I'm concerned for the little ones who aren't trained on this yet, the kindergartners, the first graders who don't have this routine down yet and don't know how to do it, or my son who's going into 6th grade who doesn't know what the drill is over at Thompson. So maybe something for you guys to think about. What is that going to look like for them when they go back to school and they can't all huddle down in one corner? So I was just thinking about the social distancing and that aspect for lockdown drills, or when there is a shelter in place and they do have to do this, because there are times when it does happen. I volunteer at the library for the past 6 years, have run the library at the school and have been there for that. And I know what that looks like, and just, something to think about. The other thing was with my son going on the band track, I was wondering how that's going to work with him having band every day. Are they going to do that virtually, or is that something that's going to take place in school if he does a hybrid? And then my last question is, if you did choose to do virtual, are you going to do virtual for the whole year, or can you decide to go back into the school and do a hybrid for the second half of the year? Like, if you make the decision at the beginning of the year to do virtual, are you stuck with that for the entire year? So that's it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for those
Thank
kind
you.
words. Appreciate it.
Just wanted to, before we went on, I just want, because of the time constraints that we have, we want to let everybody have a chance to speak that would like to speak. So if anybody has already spoken and has come back to raise their hand, if you have a comment that you'd like to submit, you can do so by emailing us at boardmeeting@middletownk12.org. Next, we have Stephanie. No last name given. If you could please provide your last name and address, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Okay. Hi, this is Stephanie Vecchiarelli. I'm at 18 Carpenter Street. I want to also commend and thank the board and the administration for all their hard work and planning as they're thinking through the best and safest way to send our kids back to school possibly. I'd like to start with a brief statement and then ask a question. First, I want to say that the health and safety of our children and the staff should be the absolute #1 priority. I am a believer in science. We know right now that this virus transmits indoors at a rampant rate. We do not know the impact of having children in the classroom will have on that spread. We have anecdotal studies at best. So I think it's very important as we're thinking through not only potential hybrid models, but if kids are in the classroom, what type of ventilation, what type of windows are going to be open? Are there outdoor classroom opportunities? I mean, these things have to be thought about, because sitting in a room with no ventilation, even masked or not masked, we know this virus is going to spread. I think taking the most conservative approach and easing back is the best approach to take. We have seen in this country where the virus is raging, where conservative approaches to reopening were not taken. And that's community-wide, not just schools, but I think we need to learn lessons from around this country, and taking the most conservative approach, I think, is the best thing we can do for our children and our community. I don't think politics should be involved in our children's and the staff that work at our schools' health. I think we need to adhere to the strictest guidelines. And then I guess to ask my question and sort of wrap up, there are horrible comments out there about how things have been handled. Again, I want to commend, I think the board is doing a great job. I think the administration is doing a good job. I know that there are some that are advocating to go back to a 5-day-a-week sort of normal, quote unquote, school schedule. I don't see how that's remotely possible. I know we have our public health expert from Middletown. I don't know if he can answer the question, but I'd love for him to weigh in, or the school nurses, on how unrealistic that is and why it's unrealistic. Because there's no possible way that we could send kids back 5 days a week to an old schedule and not have rampant spread of this disease when these kids are going to be indoors and mingling together during the entire day. So if someone can comment on that at some point, that would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Laura.
Hi. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
Laura. Could you please provide your last name and address, please?
My last name is Abt, A-B-T, and I'm at 16 Whiteacre Boulevard.
Thank you.
Just a couple quick questions. Would it be possible to see the breakout of the child care needs by elementary, middle, and high school? I just feel the numbers are a bit skewed if we're including high school and middle school students with those that need childcare. I also am curious if the quarantining and isolation guidelines that you're laying out are required by the Department of Health, or if this is something that we have come up with as a suggestion. Just quickly to say that the virus is running rampant throughout the country is not true, and there has been reports that came out just today that infection statistics, especially in Florida, have been were flawed, and non-positive rates were not being reported. So my biggest concern right now is that monumental decisions are being made based on fear, what ifs, and data. I completely empathize with the fact that there are many people within our district who are considered high risk. And for those accommodations should undoubtedly be made to ensure their safety. Parents who are not comfortable sending their children back to school should have the option to keep them home. And I am also empathetic to the fact that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution to this unprecedented time. With that being said, I do believe the quarantine and isolation rules that you laid out seem extreme. There are thousands of Middletown parents who are pleading with you to get our children back in the classroom full-time with their peers and teachers to give them the in-person education they deserve. The education that Middletown prides itself on, and the education we expected our children receive by choosing to move to Middletown should not be taken from our children. Our youngest learners, especially, cannot thrive in a virtual education setting without the constant supervision and assistance of an adult. My family, as many other Middletown residents, is only made up of 2 full-time working parents. It will be impossible for both me and my husband to work while at the same time educating my son. The financial burden in itself, not opening schools, on our community will be devastating. Parents will be forced to stay home, and will likely be women forced out of the workplace. The emphasis that childcare really needs to be taken into consideration. My heart literally aches for our most vulnerable students, our special ed students who are not receiving the services they need, and for our economically disadvantaged students whose hours in school are sometimes the most favorite part of their day, those whose only meals may be the ones they get at school. Teachers are often the people who first detect abuse and neglect of our children. Continuing to keep our students home and out of school without the science and data to back the decision is a huge mistake with disastrous implications. The American Academy of Pediatrics stated, and I quote, "Although many questions remain, the preponderance of evidence indicates that children and adolescents are less likely symptomatic and less likely to have severe disease resulting from COVID-19 infection. In addition, children are less likely to become infected and to spread infection. Policies to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 in schools must be balanced with the known harm families and communities and keeping children at home." The research from Brown University similarly found as of June 24th, 916 child care centers serving more than 20,000 children. Just over 1% of staff and 0.16% of children are confirmed infected with the virus. There's countless documented data supporting that children, especially our young children, do not become infected, nor are carriers of COVID-19. I urge you to rely on the data and when making decisions that will have lifelong consequences on our children. We as a community are willing to sacrifice the extracurriculars and non-essentials to give our children the core education they all deserve. I will end with this citation that the AAP published, the American Academy of Pediatrics published just 4 days ago. "We recognize that children learn best when physically present, but children get much more than academic skills, get healthy meals and exercise, mental health support, and other services that cannot be replicated online. Schools play a critical role in addressing racial and social inequity. Our nation's response to COVID-19 has laid bare inequities and consequences for children that must be addressed. This pandemic is especially hard on families, children with disabilities, access to healthcare. Returning to school is important for the healthy development and well-being of children, but we must pursue reopening in a way that is safe for all students, teachers, and staff. Silence to guide decision-making on reopening schools. Public health agencies must make recommendations based on evidence, not politics. We should leave it to health experts to tell us what is best to do regarding opening up our schools. And just to end with that, if anybody has data that children are spreaders of the virus, I would love to see that. We need
Thank you.
On facts, not.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Lisa L.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Lisa. Can you please state your last name and address for the record, please?
It's Lisa Liebeck, 17 Beach, Port Monmouth.
Thank you.
My comment or question is based on, I have 2 students that are in LLD for different reasons. And my question is, you haven't, in the slideshow, it didn't really talk about the students that, whether they have health concerns or special needs, that they can't actually return to school, whether it be a hybrid or not. And just wondering if you were going to accommodate certain students that are identified that wouldn't be able to physically return to school because of their issues. For instance, my one son is documented with an extreme anxiety disorder. So returning to school a couple days a week, wearing a mask, and being nervous about being around other students would make his anxiety worse. And he would not be learning. He'd just be panicked the whole time he was in class. So he has to stay home. My other student, son, has problems with keeping his hands to himself and sitting down. So my fear is, instead of educating him, teachers would be trying to teach him how to behave in a new school environment of sit in your seat, don't go near other students, wear a mask. They'd be focusing on that instead of being able to focus on his education. Therefore, we are going to have to keep them both home for their personal problems. Then I'm also thinking about kids that have underlying health conditions, or they have family members that do. So I was wondering if those individual kinds of students would be, the plan would be in place for those kinds of students, if you guys do go back, if in person a couple days a week or a couple hours a day or something like that. So you guys didn't really talk about special ed that much in the slideshow. So that was just my question. That's it.
Okay, thank you. We're getting close to our 30-minute mark. Chris, how many more do we have, people who want to speak tonight?
I'm seeing 16 hands raised right now. One of them, one hand raised has already spoken tonight. So we're looking at, another one just came up, so we're looking at 16.
Okay, I'm not sure what to do at this point. We're close to our 30-minute mark. Am I wrong? Let's take 2 more callers and then have anyone else email us.
Pam, can't we make a motion to hear what they have to say?
Well, my fear is that we're going to be here till 12 a.m., Mrs. Minuis, and I want all these questions answered. I wrote down all the questions, and I want our professionals to be able to answer them. And I don't want to be here till midnight. We do have 2 more meetings coming up.
It just seems like this is the first time that we really laid this out to the public, and they have questions, and we should.
I understand, but I want their questions answered tonight so that they can, have that satisfaction. I don't want them to just ask a question and not to get an answer. So can we take 2 more tonight, and then everyone else can email us, and then our professionals can answer so that people get the answers to their questions tonight who've already asked.
Okay, next is Stacy Jones.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi. Stacy Jones, 92 Lehigh Drive in Lincroft. Thank you to all of the administration and the board for all of your efforts. This is a huge undertaking, so I appreciate all that you're doing. I did send an email before this meeting to Dr. George and the administration and the board with some of my thoughts. I do have a couple of questions, and I have 1 or 2 points that I feel I want to make sure are heard. As I mentioned when I sent the email, my background is a master's in public health. I've studied epidemiology at a very high level. I feel, and I stated this in my email, that the reason you're not seeing restaurants open indoors right now is because this is an aerosolized virus, and it spreads through the ductwork and systems in the buildings at times, as well as within the 6-foot proximity. So I feel like one of the strongest and best things that you can do to mitigate possible spread amongst students and staff and anyone in the building as you reopen is to require masks of both students and staff at all times while you are indoors. And even if you are telling me, but unless you're telling me you're outfitting the ventilation system with HEPA filters and looking into UV lighting, which I also mentioned in my email is being used in some collegiate environments. It is imperative, and one of the strongest safeguards you have in creating an environment for these students to sit in a classroom for whether it be 4 hours on a modified half-day schedule or a normal full-day schedule, for both the students and the staff to have that protection of a mask. And as I stated in my email, you know, KN95s are $2 to $3 a mask nowadays and easily sourced. They're not hard to come by. You can order them in a pack of 10 and have your family outfitted for, you know, a very nominal fee. That stated, I did listen to everything that you said. A couple of thoughts. I'm concerned about whether you're trying to implement lunch into the school day or you're trying to look at modified split schedule session. I don't feel that was clear based on your presentation tonight. And I would like to understand what they're looking at, because obviously in a lunchroom environment, you know, you don't have the same level of social distancing. And even if you keep them in a classroom, again, all masks are off. It's going to be more than the 10 minutes of transfer time in terms of the disease transferring if someone is in that room. And I'd like to understand that better. And then also, whatever you choose as the options for the district to select from when we have 4 weeks of notice for the beginning of the school year, this is a very fluid situation for everyone. You know, the numbers change daily. We're in a pandemic. I do not feel it's fair to ask anyone to commit from September to June when we could say, okay, you know what? You tell me you're not requiring masks for both staff and students. I don't want my kids to go to school. XYZ parent, whatever. I'm saying now, if I make that choice, I'm stuck with my kid on virtual learning from September to June.
Excuse me, ma'am, your 3 minutes are up. Could you please wrap up? Thank you.
Sure. So my point is, I would like you to give the families the opportunity to do it on a marking period basis, whatever they choose. I believe Florida set this model up where they had to make a choice for one marking period at a time. They were either in school or not. And the only other question.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Your 3 minutes are up, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This will be our last for the evening.
Okay, next is Ellen Twigg.
Helen?
Ellen.
Helen or Ellen? Ellen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Ellen.
Okay, sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting. I just wanted to ask, my first question is around the plans here. I've heard that you have formed a number of committees, and the committees sound like they're addressing the various areas relative to the guidance that you're given by the state. But my question is, there are health and safety professionals, there's business continuity folks, there are pandemic planners. Have you consulted any of these independent professionals in terms of interpreting the regulations and the standards relative to the plan that you have and the effectiveness? We've heard already tonight from an epidemiologist, we've heard from, you know, your doctor, and there seems to be some opinions there that appear to be a little bit conservative in terms of what I have seen as a professional executed in terms of business continuity, pandemic planning, and also health and safety and well-being. So I just am wondering if you've considered that externally and also benchmarked with other school districts in the area around that. My second question is relative to the survey. Again, I like the comment that the woman made around the kindergarten area with relative around childcare. Also, in terms of the special needs question, I have a son who has special needs, and I have concerns around the way the question was asked and that it may have weighted things against putting the special needs ahead of the regular, quote unquote, regular learners, and that those who did not have special needs individuals may not have, you know, had a vested interest in that. Also, in addition to that, I would like to know what the accommodations will be made for those special needs learners. My son's IEP was not executed during the pandemic crisis, and he has been set back. And then the last question is how do you plan to help working parents? As it was pointed out, women are definitely disadvantaged in this area with two parents working, and even more so if you have a special needs person. I have had to hire a person to assist me at the cost of $2,200 a month with my son during this pandemic. And I'm fine to spend that money, but I think there are people who do not have the ways and means to do that. And how are we helping those disadvantaged parents meet the needs of the special needs folks if we plan on not returning with in-class person learning? And again, I do appreciate what you are doing, but I would ask that you do it with the guidance of external experts in these areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to go back to all the questions that people asked. Right from the beginning, Donna Smith asked a question about testing. She says she gets tested weekly, and why can't we test the kids weekly and get them back into school full time?
Are you asking for us to answer the questions at this time?
Please,
Because
yes.
there were a plethora of questions. I thought what might be most appropriate is that we would take these questions back to our subcommittee. We could also review the video too, as well as in the question and answers, and prepare for our final presentation to have the answer to all these questions. Some of the questions really can't be answered until the final plan has been established. So I'm not sure how we would actually go about answering all those questions at this time.
Okay, there are some questions that I know we have the answer to. Let's see. Will we make special ed a priority? I know that's something that's under consideration. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that.
It is absolutely under consideration. We do not have a final plan yet, so I can't really speak to exactly what that would look like. But the equity of, and it would depend on the program. It's a special class program. So again, those are broad questions that I couldn't paint with a wide brush, you know. But yes, there's an equity issue as it relates to special education.
If I may, Rogers, if I may, and I do appreciate under your leadership as board president and the other board members' desire to be as transparent and communicative as possible with the public, especially those who ask questions this evening. I think it's important to note that many of the questions that were asked, whether they can or can't be answered, they do often involve legal issues that are in many instances moving targets at this point in time, as there really is no definitive guidance from the state and or federal government. So for instance, the question of will special education be a priority? The obvious answer is yes. How much more details can you give? The reality is whether it's a priority or not, personally or individually on behalf of the board or administration, the reality is there are federal and state laws that require a fate for special ed for students who are identified as in need of special services. So is it a priority? It's a legal obligation to provide those services in compliance with identified IEPs and or other state regulations. The goal and the intent of the district, irrespective of what the plan says, would be to comply with those laws as well. So I just want to make sure we manage expectations with some of the questions.
Okay.
It may be yes today, but it could be maybe tomorrow.
Okay. One of the callers asked, what is symptomatic? Is it one symptom or is it two symptoms that makes a child have to go home and not stay in school for the day?
Again, Ms. Rogers, I would defer Dr. George to delegate the answering of that question to one of his staff members. However, again, to the extent the plan is not finalized as of today, number one, and number two, that answer would be subject to guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and state and local health officials as well.
Okay.
Pam, can I say something? It doesn't look like we're going to get answers. Can't we just hear out the rest of the people? I don't believe we're going to get any answers from what we've gotten so far. So why can't we just get a motion and let the rest of the people speak? And if Dr. George can't give answers tonight, he could have them all for the next meeting.
Okay, I'm just, I was just hoping to answer these questions tonight.
But
Because I
every
know
time you
that
ask, they said.
everyone's upset. I know that everyone's upset. Yeah, okay, let's make a motion to extend public comment so we can hear people's concerns.
I make the motion.
I second the motion. Tom Gimo seconds the motion.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Hang on a second, Pam. Pam, I'm sorry, I was reaching for my mute. As part of the discussion, we've done this before. We during some of the meetings around Port Monmouth, are we going open-ended or are we imposing another half an hour? Let's just be clear about what we're moving on before we vote.
Joan, what's your motion?
Wait a minute. I think we should let them, they said there were 16 more speakers. Let the 16 more speakers speak.
How about 30 more minutes, Joan?
Is that going to be enough time now? I don't think.
I believe so, Joan.
All right, well, let's take it from there. If it's not in another half hour, we'll make another motion.
What's your motion, Joan?
I make a motion
That makes sense.
for 30 minutes.
Okay.
I second.
So the motion, we have a motion on the table to extend for 30 minutes.
But
second,
and we also have a second.
Second,
we're locking down the 16 that are out there right now, right? The 16 folks that have hands up.
I can't hear you, John.
John is trying to ask, sorry, I heard the beginning. He's trying to say that, I think it was 15 total, to lock it at that number at the very
Yes,
least and not.
absolutely, absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah, and if you've already
That's what he
spoken,
was
please,
saying.
if you've already spoken, please understand that you won't be able to speak again tonight, but we do have other meetings coming up where you will be able to speak, and you can always email us. Okay, so.
all right, so Joan, why don't
Yeah.
you amend your motion in accordance with what John has said?
All right, I amend my motion to let the next 15 speakers speak.
For what amount of time, John?
Well, if they
As
each
long as
get
it takes for the
minutes, it's 45 minutes, right?
3 times 15. Okay. So we have a second on the table as well.
I'll second that motion. I second the motion made by Joan.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right.
Okay, next is Kate Farley.
Hi, thank you for allowing us to continue to speak. And thank you for the time you've taken tonight. A lot of what I had to say has been covered by others and I won't be repetitive. I did send the board and many of the administrators a letter a couple weeks ago that was signed by hundreds of elementary school parents in Middletown advocating for a return to full-time in-person learning if feasible to do so within the DOE guidelines. And I've spoken with many of you about that letter. So a lot of what I have to say is covered in there and I won't repeat it here, but in light of what we've heard tonight, I would like to just urge you all as you are, considering the plans for the fall to also consider the many other health considerations around our young students, particularly our young learners, but really all of our students. When I hear things like the importance of teaching them really not to play and not to interact and to be sure to stay so far apart, but then we're also talking about having them wear masks all the time. I mean, the reality is that as important as the education, the curriculum is that the students are learning, and it is important and it's very important that they get that education in person. As the mother of an incoming first grader, I can tell you that virtual learning just simply does not work for our youngest learners, and no amount of revamping is going to, convince me otherwise. They need to be there in person. But part of being there in person also means, the social interaction with their fellow students, with their teachers, and that entire environment. And I think that obviously safely, but we need to kind of keep in mind what was presented tonight was the fact that for most people, this virus, and most young people, including children, this virus presents very mildly. And it's the kind of thing you can recover from at home. So in light of saying that in your very presentation, and then at the same time, implementing these very stringent guidelines, and I understand that you're bound to do what the Department of Education is requiring you to do. But the reality is 6 feet of distancing in classrooms is just simply not feasible, whether you have 50% of students in class, 33% of students in class. It's not realistic in a school setting. So we're looking at kids in masks all day. And that's a reality that you're going to have to ask parents whether or not they want to send their kids to school in. And I think what you saw, what we saw from the results of the survey is many parents are ready to send their kids back. And I heard from a lot of parents tonight who might not be, and that's their prerogative. If they would like to wait and keep their child home and do virtual learning, they can absolutely do so. But many of us are ready to send our child back. And if they're going to have to wear masks, then we might as well just go back full time and let them try to interact the best that they can to really get, that school experience for both the curriculum and, the interaction and the socialization, because it's so important to their overall health. And there's a lot of talk about social emotional well-being. And, it feels like lip service if then we're so hyper focused on this virus that the data, not anecdotal data, actual data based on other schools, daycares, and scientists, pediatricians tell us this virus does not affect children severely, thank goodness. And they do not spread it. Adults spread it to other adults, adults spread it to children. That's what we know. So taking all of that into account, I would just urge the board and everyone on these committees to really think about the entire child, the entire health and safety of the child, not just coronavirus. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Judy Musa. Hello? Okay, should we move on?
Yes, let's move on. If Judy comes back, we'll take her comment.
Okay, we'll move on to Stephanie Barker. Actually, I take that back. We'll move on to Michael Pitzer. He is next in line.
Hi, it's actually Michelle Pitzer from
Michelle.
6 on Monmouth Avenue in Port Monmouth. Good evening. My first is to just remind you all that Port Monmouth School is sitting vacant. And if we need that space for social distancing, please reconsider your decision to close our school, especially in light of the new development and our new needs. I'm really hoping that that will be something that you will consider because we do need that space. Secondly, I'd like to just comment about the Spread Love Not Hate Unity March. I did attend with my high schooler and I was very proud of the demonstration and the civic action on the part of the students. They did their best to spread awareness and understanding about the systemic racism in our town and the inequality and the problems that we have with our curriculum. So I'm very proud of them, and I just wanted to, say that I was very sad about the way that the first speaker mischaracterized it. I believe that they were very brave in speaking up and organizing and, sharing their experiences. And it was beautiful, and it was much needed. It was a good step towards increasing racial equality here in Middletown. So kudos to them. And last but not least, I do want to say that I had problems with the survey. When I was taking it for my students, for my children, I was not allowed technically to finish the survey for either student. So I guess I would be one of those people who submitted an incomplete survey. And I'm wondering if those answers were discarded or if my answers actually counted at all. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
And next is Stephanie Barker.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hi, this is Sean Barker. Appreciate you guys giving us the extra time. I live at 76 Shelburne Drive in Lincroft, and I think most will agree that there's no substitute for in-person learning, and safety is obviously the number one concern for everyone. But with that being said, let's just assume the coronavirus isn't going anywhere anytime soon. One would think that the scale will essentially tip where more have contracted the virus than not. So, proposing that we should seriously consider a scenario where teachers and students who have tested positive for antibodies can essentially have a normalcy, while everyone.
The speaker is breaking up.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, yes, we still have you.
Sorry, I'll try to quickly paraphrase this. I just want to basically say that I think that at some point with the rise of the coronavirus and as many people that are getting it, we should seriously consider a scenario where those who have tested positive for the antibodies, students and teachers, are essentially migrating to an environment where they can go back to their normalcy, while everyone else who is either concerned or has not been infected with the virus can continue to practice, whichever the best practices that are, provided by the public health professionals. So that's my first question. And the second thing is, I just want to mention that my wife also sent an email to the Board of Education's main email address with some additional questions that pertain to my son's IEP. And we felt more comfortable discussing those in a private setting. And so, we appreciate your attentiveness in advance, and thank you so much. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Nicole Lepuznik.
Hi, my name is Nicole Lepuznik. I live at 171 Green Oak Boulevard. Joanne, thank you for advocating for us to hear our voices. I appreciate that. Will all the families in the school be given the courtesy of a notification in the event a student or staff member tests positive for COVID, or will only members within that cohort be advised? That's it. A lot of parents have asked questions that I had as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Amanda Westcott.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Amanda Westcott. I'm at 28 Ravine Road, that's Red Bank, New Jersey. And I guess my question is, I have two sons in elementary school, both have learning disabilities and have IEPs, and it seems like in the spring, we were all scrambling to do e-learning, and the IEPs were kind of an afterthought. Kind of regardless of what happens in the fall with the format of education, what assurances do I have from the board that my IEPs for my kids will actually be followed in full in the fall? I think that's the extent of my question.
Okay, Ms. Rogers, as we wait for the next speaker, I can just say that upon the advice of counsel, I would advise the administration not to respond specifically to that parent's question about her child. That would be a confidential matter. She can feel free to reach out to Dr. George to schedule a meeting to discuss the particulars of her child's IEP. Thank you.
Okay, next is Vera Piasecki.
Hi, just real quick questions or comments. As you come forward with your proposal, I think it would be useful to explain or compare. There are a lot of private schools that seem to be going back full time. And I know some people particularly are looking at enrolling their kids in classes of 20 odd in kindergarten in the private schools. So they seem to be going more with whether it's plexiglass dividers versus social distancing. I think it would be useful when you communicate with the community on your final decision to understand what the difference is. There are other districts like Berkeley Heights that's highly rated that just announced they're looking at a 5-day part-time half-day schedule as well. The other question I had is, if we're looking at social distancing, which seems to imply that the classrooms or the amount of kids in a classroom will be a lot less, I'm become worried about clustering of kids with special needs in classrooms. We have that problem even now in some elementary schools. And I'd like to understand how we make sure that we maintain natural proportions when we go, or when you're looking at a social distancing hybrid model that I don't know, if you have 15 kids in a class versus 30 in middle school, how are you going to make sure that there's natural proportions and you're not sticking, 10 kids that have IEPs or need in-class support into one classroom? Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next is Kelly Ionone.
Hi, Kelly Ionone. I live at 237 Kingfisher Drive, Middletown. Just based on the first speaker about the Unity March, quite honestly, so many of you jumped and gasped at what she said. You really should have jumped and gasped at the signs, because there were pictures of them and it was school property, and that would not be allowed at any other event on school property. So if we're gonna get that upset in our homes as adults, we should have been just as upset at the school. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks.
And next is Cindy Cook.
Yes, hi, my name is Cindy Cook. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Cindy Cook, 37 Mills Avenue in Port Monmouth. Just two questions. Regarding the quarantine guidelines, staying home 14 days, 10 days, whatever the case would be at that time, would there be access to the student to teacher ratio where like the child would not miss any classwork or assignments or any lectures? That's one question. And the second question that I have is that in my case, I have two children that have what they call change of season bronchitis, which has been documented with the school's nurse every year, and they're both on nebulizers. Now, I know one of the symptoms to the coronavirus is a cough. How is that going to affect like the children that have that kind of illness? Is there any like going to be any kind of guidelines versus that? If it's documented with the school that at certain times the child will be, will have that particular thing because they will be on an nebulizer, and that is it. That's my only two questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, next is Liam Reynolds.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm Liam Reynolds. I live at 251 Chapel Hill Road, Atlantic Highlands. I just want to say what I'm about to say is covered on the on an Instagram account known as XYLYL. So I just want to say I'm briefly taking it from what they've had to say about this whole situation. I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree is a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been feared in flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to the end of a long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, that Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of that Negro is still badly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later,
I'm sorry, we lost you.
Okay, this is going to be our final speaker, as I see no more hands raised after this. Suzanne Siegler.
Hi, I appreciate you guys taking all of our questions. My question is, I have a pre-K. This is our third year in pre-K. We have an IEP, and I'm personally not comfortable with sending her back. But has anybody reviewed what the psychological effects would be on these children, especially in the younger grades, not being allowed to share, not being allowed to touch or embrace or be compassionate on the playground? You know, that's like a huge concern for me. So to each their own, if you open, that's great. But my main concern really is my daughter and whether or not that's going to affect her when she goes to Lincroft for kindergarten. And I'm sorry, I live at 4 Lawley Drive in Lincroft. But I just want to know if anything's being done for that. And if we choose not to come back to school for our IEP, can we continue virtually? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, that's a question I can answer. You absolutely can. With all of these plans, there will always be the virtual option that you can take. Is that our last? That's our last for the night?
That is our last, yes.
Okay, I need a motion to adjourn the meeting, please.
And before we do, if I could just make a comment, I just want to say that, first of all, I want to thank everyone for their comments and their questions tonight. We will review all these questions as an administrative team. We will use this in our subcommittee work, and we will also use this to prepare for our presentation on the 29th. So really want to thank everybody for their thoughts and their comments and their questions tonight.
Pam, I have a question. I see people are flashing comments. How do we get those comments?
The comments, are they in the, if you push more, do you see them in the chat? Are they in the chat? Nope, not in the
No.
chat.
No.
Are they the
Maybe
YouTube?
on YouTube.
All right, just
I
want to know
haven't gone
because there's not enough comments, but we're listening to people speak, so.
Chris Rotolo, is it YouTube? It's YouTube Live, right? That it streams on?
Correct, yes. The district YouTube channel is where this is live streaming.
So we could go to the district YouTube channel after this, or say tomorrow, and it would still be there. We could go look at the comments.
Correct.
Pam, I'm actually looking at the comments right now. There's some good questions. A lot of these have been covered. There's also just a fair amount of trolling on there. So bring a salt shaker.
Yeah, I saw some advertisements for cryotherapy and some other things on there. So
great, that's helpful. Yeah.
Some
All right,
non-related things there.
Okay. I need a motion to adjourn the meeting, please.
So moved.
I need a second, please.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstention. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.